No assistant ever lasted more than 10 days at Hartman & Co. The CEO, William Hartman, was infamous across Chicago, brilliant, ruthless, and colder than the steel towers he worked in. His world ran like a machine, perfect, precise, and unyielding. So why did everything change when she walked in? Clara Bennett was late to her interview, her skirt crooked, coffee stains on her resume. By all logic, she should have been dismissed in an instant. Instead, she began a journey that would upend not only William's company, but his very soul. How could a woman with no degree, no polish, and no chance in the cutthroat corporate world find herself at the center of million-dollar deals? Why did she stay when others fled? And what would it cost her when loyalty clashed with pride and affection with betrayal? This is not just a story about business. It's about walls built high and the messy, human love strong enough to break them down. Before we begin, let me ask you, would you risk everything for someone who once let you down? If this story moves you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin. Chicago's skyline glimmered with its usual mix of steel and ambition. In the heart of the Loop, on a corner of Wacker Drive, stood Hartman & Co., one of the most prestigious consulting firms in the Midwest. Inside its towering glass building, every floor hummed with urgency, analysts rushing from meeting to meeting, managers glued to their phones, assistants typing as if their keyboards were lifelines. And at the very top, on the 38th floor, reigned William Hartman, the CEO. His name carried both admiration and dread. Admiration because he had taken a modest regional firm and transformed it into a national powerhouse. Dread because his standards were so unforgiving that no one, especially not his personal assistants, seemed able to meet them. The rumor circulating through the cubicles was that William's last 5 secretaries had not lasted more than 10 days. Some quit in tears after 3. One woman had reportedly run out of the building during lunch and never returned, leaving her handbag behind. Another sent a resignation email at 2 a.m., claiming she had recurring nightmares of William's voice correcting her grammar. By now, it had become something of a legend in the office, the impossible job. William Hartman's secretary. That Tuesday morning, when the elevators opened, employees lifted their heads in curiosity. A new candidate had arrived. Clara Bennett stepped into the marble lobby, balancing a purse, a worn leather folder, and a cup of coffee that threatened to spill with every step. She was late already 20 minutes past her scheduled interview, but instead of panicking, she walked with a strange sense of composure, almost as if she had accepted that lateness was her brand of honesty. Her auburn hair was pinned loosely, already coming undone from her rushed morning. A small tear showed at the hem of her gray skirt, and a paper napkin from the coffee shop had somehow attached itself to her shoe. She noticed it halfway across the lobby, paused, and bent down to peel it off. Instead of embarrassment, she chuckled softly. The receptionist, a young woman named Dana, who had seen the rise and fall of many assistants, raised her eyebrows. "Interview for Mr. Hartman?" she asked, already pitying her. "Yes," Clara replied, setting down her coffee before it betrayed her. 10 o'clock sharp. Well, 10 o'clock-ish. Let's call it fashionably late. Dana stared. Nobody joked about being late to William Hartman. "Mr. Hartman doesn't tolerate lateness," she warned, her voice flat. "And I don't tolerate broken alarm clocks," Clara said with a quick smile. "Looks like we'll have to compromise." Dana pressed the intercom reluctantly. "Mr. Hartman, the candidate has arrived." The response came back after a long pause. "Send her in." Clara exhaled, grabbed her folder, and walked toward the glass doors of the CEO's office. Her hand pushed the door a little too firmly, and it swung open with a sharp thud. She winced at the sound. Great start. Clara, really professional. Inside, the office looked more like a museum than a workspace. The furniture was sleek, minimalist, and clearly expensive. The floor-to-ceiling windows gave a panoramic view of the Chicago River below, sunlight reflecting off the water like scattered diamonds. Behind a massive walnut desk sat William Hartman, He was everything the rumors had promised early 40s. Tall, with dark hair perfectly combed back, and a suit so precisely tailored it could have been stitched onto him. His expression was unreadable, carved in stone. The only movement came from his pen, which he twirled slowly between his fingers. His eyes, a cold blue, flicked up the moment Clara entered. "You're late," he said flatly. Clara stopped just a few feet inside. She could have apologized. She could have offered excuses. Instead, she lifted her chin and said, "And you're observant." For the first time, something other than indifference flickered across his face, mild surprise. He gestured toward the chair opposite his desk. "Sit." Clara crossed the room, her heels clicking against the polished floor. She sat carefully, folding her hands in her lap. She noticed a small smear of lipstick on the edge of her coffee cup and made a mental note not to smile too widely. William studied her folder, which was slightly crumpled from being stuffed into her purse. Clara Bennett. Degree. "I started one," she admitted, "didn't finish. Life had other plans. Experience plenty," she said, "not all of it glamorous. I've worked in retail, customer service, and for a while at a veterinary clinic where I was in charge of chasing a goat that liked to escape." "Very transferable skills, I assure you." His brow furrowed. "You're not qualified. Probably not." Clara agreed, her tone calm. "But I pay attention. I'm reliable, even when chaos happens. And sometimes—" She leaned slightly forward. "Chaos is exactly what a place like this needs." Silence hung between them. Through the window, a boat moved slowly down the river, the faint sound of its horn echoing in the distance. William set down his pen. "You understand that no one has lasted in this position more than 10 days. Then I guess I'll aim for 11. Clara replied softly, though her eyes held steady, for reasons he couldn't explain. William let out the faintest sigh, not irritation, but something closer to reluctant intrigue. "Trial basis," he said at last. 2 weeks, starting tomorrow at 8 o'clock sharp. 7:59, Clara corrected, her lips tugging into the smallest smile. He didn't return the smile, but he also didn't dismiss her. And in William Hartman's world, that was as close to approval as anyone ever got. As Clara left the office, straightening her skirt and holding her coffee like a small trophy, the staff who had been discreetly watching from the break room whispered among themselves, "How long do you think she'll last?" One analyst murmured, 3 days. Another said, "Maybe less." Added a third. Yet, behind the glass doors, William remained seated at his desk, staring at the door that had just closed. His pen twirled slower, then stilled completely. For the first time in years, the impossible job might not feel so impossible. The walnut door clicked shut behind Clara, and for a moment, the office returned to its usual stillness. William Hartman remained seated, elbows on the desk, fingertips pressed together. His eyes narrowed as he replayed the last 5 minutes in his mind. He had expected another nervous applicant, desperate to please, rehearsed within an inch of their life. Instead, this woman had walked in 20 minutes late, skirt uneven, folder wrinkled, and still managed to look him in the eye without flinching. It was unsettling. Meanwhile, in the elevator on her way down, Clara blew out a slow breath and muttered to herself, "Well, that went about as smoothly as a goat chase." She caught her reflection in the mirrored wall, a strand of auburn hair sticking straight up like a defiant antenna. She smoothed it down with her palm and chuckled. At least he didn't throw me out on the spot. Back upstairs, William tapped his pen against the desk. He disliked disorder. Everything in his world was polished, exact, and predictable, except this woman who had breezed in like a gust of wind, leaving papers, words, and impressions scattered in her wake. The following morning, Clara arrived precisely at 7:59, balancing 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Dana at reception. "Peace offering," Clara said warmly. "Sorry for barging in yesterday." Dana, caught off guard, blinked. Most new hires barely looked at her. She took the cup, mumbled thanks, and secretly hoped Clara would last longer than 3 days, though she didn't dare bet on it. When Clara stepped into William's office, she tripped slightly on the rug, but caught herself just in time. "Your carpet tried to assassinate me," she announced, setting her bag down. William didn't look up from his computer. "The carpet has been here for 15 years without incident." "Well, it just met me," Clara replied, straightening her blouse. "That changes everything." Finally, he glanced at her. "Miss Bennet, this is not a comedy stage." "No worries," she said with a shrug. "I'm more of a tragicomedy anyway." He stared at her, expression unreadable, before returning to his screen. "Your duties are straightforward. Calendar management, correspondence, screening calls. Nothing creative is required." "Understood," she said. "Though I can't promise not to add color-coded sticky notes. Organization is my guilty pleasure." His jaw tightened. "Stick to the system already in place." Clara gave a small nod, though her eyes twinkled. "We'll see about that." Later that morning, a call came through. Clara answered with cheerful confidence. "Good morning, Hartman and Co. This is Clara Bennet. How may I brighten your day?" There was a pause on the other end. I was calling for Mr. Hartman." "Oh, right. Of course. One moment, please." Clara pressed several buttons on the phone, frowned, then accidentally transferred the caller to accounting. A moment later, William stormed out of his office. "Miss Bennet, did you just send our largest client to accounts payable?" "Possibly," she admitted, wide-eyed. "Though in my defense, your phone has more buttons than a spaceship. Johnson is not interested in accounts payable." William snapped, noted. "Johnson equals very important. Accounts payable equals no-go zone," she said, scribbling on a notepad. Then she tilted her head. "You should really consider simpler technology. Rotary phones are making a comeback." William exhaled slowly through his nose, the way one does when deciding whether to argue or surrender. By lunchtime, Clara had managed to misplace a file, bump into a stack of binders that crashed loudly onto the floor, and spill a few drops of coffee dangerously close to William's Italian leather briefcase. Each time, she apologized lightly, but never with fear, always with that calm steadiness that somehow diffused the tension. It puzzled William. Most people wilted under his sharp remarks, yet Clara absorbed them like rain on stone, unshaken. At 3 o'clock, she entered his office with a new folder. "Here's your updated schedule, Mr. Hartman. I shifted your call with Sterling to tomorrow, so you won't have back-to-back meetings all day. You'll actually have 20 minutes to breathe." "I didn't authorize that change," he said coolly. "No," she agreed, "but I figured oxygen might be important to your survival." For the first time, his lips twitched. Not a smile, heaven forbid, but a fleeting crack in the ice. That evening, as the office emptied and the Chicago lights flickered on outside, William lingered at his desk. He stared at the faint outline of Clara's handwriting on a sticky note she had left behind. "Don't forget to eat something green today." It was absurd, entirely unprofessional, and yet he felt a peculiar warmth in his chest. Still, his logical mind pushed back. She was inexperienced, clumsy, far from the polished assistant he demanded. Surely she wouldn't last. But another thought slipped through the cracks. What if she did? Clara Bennett's first official morning as William Hartman's assistant began with a quiet determination. She arrived early, her skirt pressed, her shoes polished as best as she could manage, and a modest thermos of coffee tucked under her arm. For a moment in the elevator, she allowed herself to hope that maybe she could blend into this office like a puzzle piece slipping into place. The doors opened on the 38th floor, and the hope dissolved. The office was not hostile exactly, but the stairs told her everything. She was the latest experiment, the new secretary to step into the role that no one survived. A tall man in accounting leaned toward a colleague and whispered, not nearly as quietly as he thought, "She won't last until Friday." Clara gave him a polite nod anyway, as though he'd just said good morning. At her desk outside William's office, Clara found 3 stacks of files waiting, each towering nearly a foot high. They were labeled only with dates cryptic, unhelpful. She flipped through one pile and frowned. Memos, contracts, invoices all jumbled together like a drawer of mismatched socks. By 9 o'clock, William emerged from his office, tie straight, expression severe. He noticed her shuffling papers and asked, "What are you doing?" "Trying to find the logic," Clara admitted. "But I think your filing system is like modern art. Everyone pretends to understand it, but no one actually does." "This system has worked for 5 years," William replied. His tone carried the finality of a judge's gavel. Clara hesitated, then offered a careful smile. "Then maybe it's due for a little friendly competition. Old system versus new system. We'll see which one wins." Before he could object, she pulled out colored folders and sticky notes from her tote bag. Green for urgent, yellow for important, blue for things that could wait until the end of time. William's jaw flexed, but he said nothing. He simply returned to his office and closed the door with a measured click. The rest of the staff, however, noticed. "Look at her," muttered Jennifer from marketing, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s. "She thinks she's some kind of genius." "She won't last a week," replied Carlos from legal. "Hartman hates when people change his systems." Clara overheard as she carried a stack of yellow files past them. Her cheeks warmed, but she forced herself to stay calm. "You knew they wouldn't welcome you. Just keep going." By mid-afternoon, the battlefield grew intense. A partner called, demanding a contract draft right now. William stepped out of his office and asked, "Miss Bennett, the Morrison contract." Clara flipped through her newly organized cabinet. Within seconds, she pulled out a green folder, handed it over, and said, "Here. Urgent items always go in green. Saves you 10 minutes of searching." William's eyes flickered. He did not thank her, but he also did not criticize a small victory. Minutes later, another crisis analyst rushed over, panicked about missing quarterly notes. Clara calmly reached into the yellow stack. Not urgent, but important. "Here you go." The analyst blinked. "How did you—" "Sticky notes," Clara said. "Don't underestimate them." By 5 o'clock, even William had to admit, though, only to himself, that the chaos around his office seemed quieter. Calls were smoother. Files appeared at the right time. Meetings ran on schedule without him needing to bark reminders. Still, the sight of her rainbow-coated files made his eye twitch. He called her into his office. "Miss Bennett, your system." He began. Color-coded brilliance, she offered lightly. "Disruptive," he said. "Effective," she countered. Their eyes locked across the polished walnut desk. For a long moment, silence stretched. Then William leaned back in his chair. "We'll test it. 1 week. If it fails, we return to the original." Clara inclined her head. "Fair enough." That night, as the building emptied, Clara lingered at her desk, rearranging the last blue folder. The floor was quiet, the city lights outside casting soft reflections on the glass walls. She sat back in her chair, rubbing her temples. It had been only 1 day, and already she felt the weight of expectations pressing on her. Part of her wanted to retreat, to shrink into the background like so many assistants before her. If she played it safe, maybe she could last longer. But another part of her, the stronger part, whispered, "No, you've spent too much of your life silencing yourself. This time, you stay visible." She closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the hum of the city below. Then she whispered aloud, "I'll make this work, even if it scares them, even if it scares me." Unbeknownst to her, William was still in his office. He paused at the sound of her voice through the slightly open door. For reasons he couldn't explain, he didn't feel the urge to correct her or shut her down. Instead, he sat quietly, pen twirling between his fingers, and wondered, could this be the one person who might actually last? The morning began with Clara's usual ritual, a steadying breath in the elevator, a whispered reminder not to trip, and the faint hope that today she might make it through without embarrassing herself. By 9 o'clock, her desk was already busy, calls blinking, messages stacking up, and the constant shuffle of staff moving through the corridor. William Hartman, as always, was behind his closed office door, running his empire in silence. Clara answered the ringing phone with cheerful confidence. Hartman and Co. This is Clara Bennett. How may I help? On the other end, a firm male voice replied. This is Johnson from Johnson & Associates. I need to speak to William immediately about the Sterling contract. Clara glanced at the screen, then at the complicated row of buttons on the phone. Okay. You can do this, she told herself. She pressed one, then another. A pause. Silence. Then, oh no. She had accidentally transferred him to the sales department. A moment later, William's door opened. His expression was sharp enough to cut glass. Miss Bennett, he said slowly. Did you just send our most valuable client to sales when he asked to speak with me? Clara froze. Possibly. But in my defense, your phone looks like it was designed by NASA. One wrong button and I'm launching satellites. Johnson is not a satellite. He's the client keeping 300 people employed, William replied, his voice cold. Clara winced, scribbling on her notepad. Johnson equals very important. No satellites. William exhaled sharply, turning back toward his office. But before he closed the door, Clara added, he sounded nervous. Though, is there trouble with that contract? William stopped. That is none of your concern. But his hesitation gave him away. Clara didn't push, though her curiosity burned. Half an hour later, a delivery man appeared at the front desk with a plain folder. Clara signed her name and placed it neatly on her desk, assuming William would collect it. When William emerged, she said, "Oh, a man dropped this off for you. Said it was urgent." William took one look and froze. Clara, that wasn't a delivery man. That was David Morrison, one of the most senior lawyers in the city. And you signed on behalf of the company. Clara's eyes widened. I signed as Clara Bennett, guardian of not losing documents. That's official enough, right? He flipped through the pages, about to scold her again, then stopped. His eyes darted back to the line where she had scribbled her name. Wait, he murmured. He scanned the clause attached to her signature. His brow furrowed. Then his eyes widened in disbelief. Do you have any idea what you just did? Clara leaned back, bracing for the worst. Committed corporate fraud. Accidentally sold your company. Do I need a lawyer? William looked up, astonishment breaking through his usual ice. You just validated a clause that protects us in the Sterling contract. Our lawyers have been searching for a loophole for weeks. And you... He stopped, shaking his head. You stumbled right into it. Clara blinked. So, I did something good. Good, William repeated. You may have just saved us $15 million. Word spread like wildfire. By mid-afternoon, whispers floated through the hallways. Did you hear the new assistant saved the Sterling deal? No way. She barely knows how the phones work. Still, Johnson was ready to walk, and now he's back at the table. Some staff dismissed it as luck. Others, like Carlos from legal, muttered, beginner's accident. Don't expect it to happen twice. But a few quietly, cautiously began to wonder if maybe Clara Bennett wasn't just another doomed secretary. That evening, William lingered in his office long after the others left. He stared at the contract spread across his desk. The solution had been there all along, but it took an untrained eye, a careless signature, to expose it. Against his better judgment, he found himself thinking back to her calm smile, her refusal to flinch when others doubted her. She was clumsy, yes, but there was something more, something steady beneath the surface chaos. And that unsettled him most of all. At her own desk, Clara sat with the soft glow of her lamp, staring at her notepad where she had doodled Johnson, Garza's important, sales, source, no go. She chuckled to herself, shaking her head. She had made a mistake, a big one. Yet, somehow, it had turned into something extraordinary. Still, doubt gnawed at her. What if it was pure accident? What if tomorrow I ruin everything? She leaned back in her chair, whispering into the quiet office. You can't keep tripping and hoping to land on gold. You'll have to prove yourself for real." She didn't notice that William, just inside his office, had paused his pen mid-scribble, listening again. He didn't step out, didn't say a word, but his thoughts lingered on the unlikely assistant who might not be so unlikely after all. Clara had been at Hartman & Co. long enough to notice patterns. William Hartman's days were wound tighter than a clock spring. He arrived before sunrise, left long after the city's lights had blinked on, and operated on a schedule that allowed no room for chance. Meetings were stacked one after another, meals were skipped more often than not, and every decision was executed with the precision of a general leading an army. But behind that flawless discipline, Clara noticed something else: a silence. Not the silence of focus, but of solitude, the kind that clung to him even when the office bustled around him. She saw it in the way he ate alone at his desk, the way his eyes rarely softened when someone laughed, and the way his shoulders stiffened at the slightest disruption. It wasn't just control, it was distance. One Thursday evening, as Clara was gathering her things, she heard a faint thud from William's office. Her heart lurched. She rushed in to find him slumped forward in his chair, his face pale, his hand gripping the edge of the desk. "Mr. Hartman," she exclaimed. He tried to wave her off, his voice hoarse. "I'm fine, just stood up too quickly." But when he tried to rise, his knees buckled. Clara was at his side instantly, steadying him with surprising strength. "No, you're not fine. Sit." She guided him to the small leather sofa along the wall. His forehead was damp with sweat. Clara quickly fetched a bottle of water from the mini fridge and pressed it into his hand. "When was the last time you ate?" she asked. William frowned as though the question was irrelevant. "Yesterday. Maybe lunch. I don't remember." Clara stared at him, disbelief mixing with exasperation. "You run a multi-million-dollar company, but you forget to eat." He bristled. "Discipline requires sacrifices." "Passing out in your office isn't discipline," she shot back. "It's a warning sign." For the first time since she'd met him, William didn't have a sharp retort. He leaned back against the sofa, closed his eyes, and let out a weary breath. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the city outside. Clara placed a cool bottle against his temple, easing the heat. He opened his eyes just enough to look at her, and for a brief moment, the ice in them melted. "You don't have to stay," he murmured. Clara softened her voice. "Maybe not, but somebody should. And right now, that somebody is me." Minutes passed. His breathing steadied. Clara sat nearby, not intruding, just present. Finally, William spoke, his voice lower, stripped of its usual command. "When I was a boy, my mother used to say success left no room for weakness, illness, fatigue, even emotions. She believed that if I wanted to lead, I had to shut all of that out." Clara's chest tightened. She could almost see the lonely child he must have been forced into perfection before he even knew who he was. "Did you believe her?" Clara asked gently. He hesitated. "I told myself I had to. My father left when I was 12. My mother doubled down on making me into her vision of strength. Since then, everything I've built has been about proving her right. And proving yourself wrong," Clara offered softly. William's lips curved in something almost like a smile, but sadder. "Perhaps." Clara sat quietly, letting the weight of his words settle. She wanted to reach out, to reassure him, but something in her held back. She wasn't sure if stepping closer would help him or scare him further behind his walls. Her heart tugged in two directions. On one hand, he was her boss, a man with more defenses than an iron fortress. On the other, he was human lonely, exhausted, and finally letting a sliver of truth slip through. Should I keep my distance, she wondered, or should I show him he doesn't have to carry this alone? She folded her hands tightly in her lap, choosing for now silence. When William finally pushed himself upright, his usual mask had returned, though not as firmly as before. "Thank you," he said simply. Clara gave a small nod. "Try eating dinner tonight. Something green. Doctor's orders." "I didn't realize you were a doctor," he replied, but his tone was lighter than usual. "I'm whatever the situation requires," she said with a faint smile. As she gathered her bag to leave, William watched her go. For the first time in years, he felt the strange comfort of not being entirely alone. It unsettled him, and yet he couldn't bring himself to regret it. That night, Clara lay awake in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling. She replayed his words, his vulnerability, the way his eyes had softened even if just for a heartbeat. Part of her ached for him. Another part warned her, "Don't get drawn in. He's your boss. He lives in a world built on control. You can't fix him." And yet, her heart whispered back, maybe he doesn't need fixing. Maybe he just needs someone to see him. She turned onto her side, restless. For the first time since she started, Clara realized her biggest challenge at Hartman & Co. wasn't the phones, the files, or the skeptical staff. It was deciding how much of herself she was willing to risk for a man who didn't know how to let anyone in. When William told Clara she would be accompanying him to the annual Chicago Business Alliance gala, she nearly choked on her tea. "Me?" she asked, wide-eyed. "Are you sure you don't mean someone important, like your head of finance or your tailor?" William looked at her evenly. "You're my assistant. The gala is an executive event. You'll be there." Clara tilted her head. "So, this is mandatory fun." "Mandatory," William repeated. "The fun is optional." Saturday evening arrived, and Clara stood in front of the mirror in her small apartment, staring at the rental gown she had chosen. It was a deep red, bold enough to make her hesitate, but fitted in a way that gave her confidence. Her neighbor had gasped when she stepped out of her bedroom. "Clara, you look like you're about to steal someone's fortune," the neighbor said. Clara laughed nervously. "Or embarrass my boss in front of his fortune." She slipped into her heels, practiced one steady breath, and reminded herself, "You can survive this. You've survived worse." The hotel ballroom glittered with chandeliers and polished marble. Guests in tuxedos and gowns floated around, holding glasses of champagne like props in a play. Clara walked in beside William, her red dress drawing glances almost immediately. She felt their eyes curious, judgmental, assessing. William leaned closer, his voice low but steady. "Ignore them. Easy for you to say," she muttered. "You look like you belong. I look like the catering staff accidentally let me borrow a dress." He didn't smile, but his tone softened. "You belong because I said you do." For the first hour, Clara kept close to William, offering polite smiles, nodding at names she couldn't remember. She whispered little observations to him when no one was looking. "That man has spinach stuck in his teeth," or "the violinist looks like she's plotting revenge on her beau." William didn't laugh, not fully, but once or twice his lips curved ever so slightly. Then came the disaster. A waiter passed by with a tray stacked high with champagne flutes. Clara, nervous and trying to move out of the way, misjudged her heel and stumbled. Her hand shot out instinctively straight into the tray. Time slowed. Crystal glasses flew through the air like startled birds, and one landed squarely against the chest of Senator Whitmore, a guest of honor, soaking his tuxedo in golden liquid. The room fell silent. Every pair of eyes turned toward Clara, who stood frozen, face burning hotter than her red dress. "I am so sorry," she stammered. The senator looked down at his dripping shirt, his expression shifting from shock to irritation. He opened his mouth to unleash what promised to be a scathing remark, but before he could, William stepped forward. "Senator," he said smoothly, removing a crisp handkerchief from his pocket and offering it, "accidents happen. Allow me to cover the cost of a replacement." Clara was simply trying to move aside. The tone left no room for blame. It was protective, decisive. The senator hesitated, glanced at William, then gave a tight smile. "Well, these things do happen." The hum of conversation slowly returned to the room. Clara's knees felt weak with relief. She expected William to turn on her the moment they stepped aside, to deliver the scolding of her life. Instead, as he guided her toward the balcony, his hand resting lightly at her elbow. He said quietly, "Are you hurt?" She blinked at him. "Hurt? No, just mortified." "Then it doesn't matter," he replied simply. Clara stared at him, caught off guard. That's it. No lecture, no icy monologue about competence. His gaze lingered on her. Not this time. On the balcony, away from the crowd. Clara leaned against the railing, her heart still racing. The city lights stretched out below them, steady and indifferent. "I thought you'd be furious," she admitted. "I was," William said, then paused, but at the senator, not at you. Clara tilted her head, studying him. The man who lived by discipline, who treated mistakes like mortal sins, had chosen for once to shield her instead of condemn her. It was the first time she realized he wasn't just a machine of control. Beneath the cold exterior, there was something else, something human, something with a heart. As the evening wound down, William escorted her back into the ballroom. The whispers followed. "Who is she? Did you see what happened?" But Clara walked a little taller, buoyed by the memory of him standing between her and humiliation. Later, in the quiet of her apartment, she sat on the edge of her bed, shoes kicked off, dress draped over the chair. Her mind replayed the look in his eyes, the steady way he had defended her. For the first time, Clara wondered if the fortress William Hartman had built around himself wasn't impenetrable after all, and she wondered dangerously if she might be the one slipping through the cracks. Monday morning felt heavier than usual. Clara noticed it the moment William walked in his stride, brisk but uneven, his jaw tighter than normal. He spent the entire morning checking his phone between meetings, sighing quietly, as though bracing for something unpleasant. By noon, she finally asked, "All right, what storm cloud is following you around today?" William set his pen down and met her eyes with a grim look. "My mother is coming to Chicago." Clara raised an eyebrow. "That doesn't sound catastrophic. Most people like visits from their mothers." He gave a dry laugh. "Most people don't have Margaret Hartman as a mother." Clara soon discovered what he meant. At precisely 3 o'clock, William's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID, muttered something under his breath, and pressed speakerphone. "William," came a crisp female voice. "It's William." "Mother," he corrected automatically. Yes," she replied, dismissing it. "I'll be in town Thursday. I've arranged lunch on Friday at the plaza with you and Caroline Whitmore." Clara froze at her desk. Even she knew the Whitmore family name carried political weight in Chicago. "Mother? I told you, I have no interest in Caroline is brilliant. Yale law, comes from a respectable family. She will be an asset to your future. I won't discuss this further." William rubbed his forehead, exasperated. "I cannot attend that lunch." "And why not?" There was a long pause. Then William's gaze flicked toward Clara. She frowned, shaking her head furiously, sensing what was coming. "Because," he said evenly, "I'm already seeing someone." Clara's mouth fell open. "Oh no, 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 no." Really, Margaret's tone shifted suspicion laced with intrigue. And who might this woman be? William didn't flinch. Clara Bennett. Clara nearly dropped her pen. Margaret was silent for a beat. Then she said, "Interesting. Then bring her to lunch instead of Caroline. Friday, 1 o'clock, the plaza. Don't be late." The call ended. Clara sat frozen, staring at William. "You did not just—" "I panicked," he admitted. "You panicked and offered me as tribute." The rest of the afternoon was a blur of Clara pacing the office. "This is insane," she said. "Do you know how humiliating this could be? Your mother thinks I'm, grooming myself to marry into her empire. She'll only believe it if we make it convincing," William replied. Clara stopped pacing, hands on her hips. "You want me to lie to your mother? I want you to help me keep her from planning my life," he said firmly. "Caroline Whitmore is not going to be my future." Clara hesitated. Part of her wanted to tell him to handle his own family drama. But another part, stubborn, compassionate, could see the exhaustion in his eyes. the pressure that had been crushing him for years. "Fine," she said at last. "But you owe me a raise and pizza, lots of pizza, deal," William said without hesitation. Friday arrived too soon. Clara borrowed a navy blue dress from her neighbor Conservative. Safe. She tried to tame her hair, but one stubborn curl refused to behave. At the plaza, Margaret Hartman was already seated at a table by the window, posture immaculate, pearls gleaming. Her eyes flicked over Clara the moment they approached. "So," she said coolly, "this is Clara." Clara extended a hand with a polite smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Hartman." Margaret shook it briefly, then gestured for them to sit. "Tell me, Clara, what field do you work in?" Clara swallowed. "I assist William, mostly scheduling, contracts, organizing." Margaret arched an eyebrow. "You're his secretary." Clara felt her cheeks warm. "Executive assistant," she corrected softly. Margaret's eyes narrowed as if she could measure Clara's worth in a glance. "And your education." Clara straightened her shoulders. "Business administration. I didn't finish my degree. Life required me to start working earlier than planned." Margaret's lips pressed thin. "I see." Clara could feel the weight of judgment pressing down. She fiddled with her napkin, nearly dropping it under the table. When she reached to retrieve it, she bumped her head lightly against the table's edge. "Oh dear," she muttered, cheeks burning. "Clumsy me." Margaret's disapproval deepened, but Clara wasn't about to shrink. She leaned forward, voice steadier than she felt. "Mrs. Hartman, I know I don't fit the picture you've painted for your son. I don't come from an influential family. My mother's a nurse back in Ohio. She worked double shifts to keep us afloat. She taught me resilience, honesty, and how to stand on my own. Those are lessons no degree ever gave me." Margaret blinked, caught off guard by the honesty. "And as for William," Clara continued, her tone softening, "he deserves someone who sees more than his resume. Someone who notices he hasn't eaten all day or that he carries the weight of the world on his shoulders. That's who I try to be." Silence hung over the table. William looked at her, surprised by the tenderness in her voice. Margaret studied Clara for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled, just faintly. "You're different," she said quietly. Clara tilted her head. "Different good or different bad?" "Different," Margaret repeated, her tone thoughtful. When lunch ended, Margaret hugged her son and gave Clara a nod that felt warmer than expected. "It was a pleasure to meet you," she said. As they walked away, Clara exhaled, finally allowing herself to breathe. Well, that was terrifying. William glanced sideways. "You handled her better than I ever could." Clara shook her head, half laughing, half serious. "Next time you decide to use me as your fake girlfriend, at least give me a warning." He smirked faintly. "I'll keep that in mind." But as they stepped into the Chicago sun, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. For the first time, she wasn't just an assistant, a pawn in William's world. She was someone who could stand at his side even in front of his formidable mother and not crumble. And that realization both thrilled and frightened her. The weeks after the luncheon with Margaret carried a different energy. The staff eyed Clara with something new. Not respect, not yet, but curiosity. Rumors had spread. She wasn't just the assistant who somehow hadn't quit. She was also the woman William Hartman had introduced to his mother. Some whispered she must have connections. Others scoffed that it was only a matter of time before she slipped up again. But Clara kept her head down, organizing files, juggling calls, and finding small ways to ease William's relentless schedule. Then came the Sterling campaign. It was one of the company's biggest opportunities in years, a national branding project for Sterling Financial, worth millions. William gathered the executives in the conference room, the air thick with tension. "Sterling is looking for bold innovation," he said, his tone sharp. "Not recycled strategies. We need fresh ideas, and we need them now." Around the table, Seasoned managers nodded, flipping through binders of research. Clara sat quietly at the end, taking notes. She wasn't meant to be part of the conversation, but as the meeting dragged on, she couldn't help noticing the repetition. Charts blurred together, pitches echoed each other. It was polished, professional, and uninspired. Finally, almost against her better judgment, she raised her hand. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Can I offer something?" The room went silent. Heads turned. A few smirks spread among the managers. One man in his 50s chuckled. "With respect, Miss Bennett, this is a high-level strategy meeting. We're discussing national campaigns, not sticky notes." Clara felt her cheeks flush, but she steadied herself. "I understand, but sometimes a fresh set of eyes can notice what experts miss." William's gaze sharpened. "Go on." Clara took a breath. "Everyone here is talking about Sterling's image power, security, wealth. But have you noticed their latest press release? They mentioned a program for single mothers opening savings accounts. It was a small line, almost hidden, but what if that's the story? Not the skyscrapers or the suits, but the families they help build stability for silence hung heavy again. The skeptical manager scoffed. "That's sentiment, not strategy." Clara met his eyes steadily. "Sentiment is strategy. People don't connect with balance sheets. They connect with hope." William studied her for a long moment. Around the table, others shifted uncomfortably, not sure whether to dismiss her or wait for his verdict. At last, William leaned back in his chair. "Develop it. Let's hear the full concept tomorrow." Clara blinked. "Me, yes. Miss Bennett," he said. "You." That night, Clara stayed late at her desk, scribbling on notepads, sketching campaign ideas. She thought of her own mother, who had struggled to keep food on the table, who had smiled through exhaustion to reassure her children. She wove that memory into a vision ads showing real families, not models. Stories about stability, about second chances. By dawn, her desk was a mess of coffee cups and scribbled drafts. The next day, she stood before the executives, hands trembling slightly as she held her folder. "I know I'm not an expert," she began, "but I do know what it feels like to choose between groceries and rent. And I think Sterling's power isn't just in their numbers, it's in how those numbers change lives." She unveiled mock-up slogans, imagery of families, and a tagline that read, "Sterling building, tomorrow together." The room was silent again, but this time, it wasn't dismissive, it was thoughtful. William broke the silence. "This is bold. It's exactly the human angle Sterling's been missing." Even the skeptical manager shifted uncomfortably in his seat, forced to nod. A week later, Sterling's executives visited the office. Clara watched nervously from the back as William presented her concept. The clients leaned in, nodding, their faces lighting up with interest. When the meeting ended, Sterling's CEO shook William's hand. "This is the direction we've been waiting for. Consider it approved." The room erupted in quiet celebration. Clara exhaled, her heart pounding. Later, as the others left, William turned to her. "Well done, Miss Bennett." Her cheeks warmed. "Thank you. I just paid attention." "You did more than that," he said, his voice softer than usual. "You saw what no one else would admit." That evening, back at her desk, Clara noticed William lingering in his office. For once, he wasn't working just staring out the window at the Chicago skyline. When she gathered her things to leave, he spoke. "Clara." She paused at the doorway. "You proved something today," he said, "to them, to me, perhaps even to yourself." She smiled faintly. "Maybe all three." Their eyes held for a moment too long, the air charged with something neither dared name. Finally, William looked away, clearing his throat. "Good night, good night," she echoed, her voice softer than usual. On the train ride home, Clara pressed her forehead against the cool glass. She felt exhilarated, proud, but also unsettled. Why did his words matter more than they should? Why did his approval make my chest ache? She closed her eyes, the city lights blurring past, and admitted to herself what she hadn't wanted to. Something had shifted, not just in her job, not just in his trust, but between them. Success had a strange way of turning heads. After the Sterling campaign launched, the company buzzed with energy. Clients praised the fresh direction. New contracts poured in. And everywhere Clara went, she felt the shift in how people looked at her. Some glanced with curiosity, others with grudging respect, but many looked with suspicion. Whispers trailed her through the hallways. She's just a secretary. How did she get her ideas in front of Sterling? You really think Hartman would risk millions on her word alone? Please, she's obviously more than his assistant. Clara tried to ignore it, focusing on her work. She told herself results spoke louder than gossip, but deep down, the whispers cut deep. The storm broke 2 weeks later at a quarterly board meeting. William stood at the head of the long mahogany table, presenting Sterling's growth charts. Clara sat to the side, jotting notes, the only non-executive in the room. When the numbers ended and the applause faded, one board member, a gray-haired man named Whitaker, leaned forward. "Impressive results," he said slowly. "But I think the board deserves clarity on where these ideas originated." William's jaw tightened. The campaign was a team effort. "Was it?" Whitaker asked, eyes sliding toward Clara. "Because from what I've heard, your assistant had a great deal of influence." A murmur rippled around the table. Clara stiffened. Another board member, Ms. Green, added coolly, "It raises questions, William, about boundaries, about whether personal relationships are influencing business decisions." The room fell silent. Every pair of eyes shifted toward Clara. Her throat tightened. Heat flushed her cheeks. She began, her voice trembling, but Whitaker cut her off. "No need to defend yourself, Miss Bennett. We all know how these things look. A young woman without credentials suddenly shaping campaigns worth millions. It defies logic." Clara's chest constricted. She turned toward William, willing him to speak. "Say something. Tell them the truth. Tell them I earned this." But William remained silent. His hands rested on the table, his eyes unreadable. The silence stretched, suffocating. Finally, Clara rose to her feet. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "If you all think my work is only the result of impropriety," she said, her voice shaking, "then perhaps this isn't the place for me." Her eyes flicked to William one last time. He didn't move. The betrayal hit her harder than any words could have. Without another glance, she gathered her folder and walked out. The hallway blurred as she hurried toward the elevators. Whispers followed, sharper than before. "Did you see her face? Knew it was too good to last." She pressed the button with trembling hands, blinking back tears. When the doors closed, the silence felt crushing. That evening, Clara sat alone in her apartment, her red dress from the gala still draped over a chair. The room felt emptier than usual. She replayed the meeting again and again, the accusations, the stares, and worst of all, William's silence. Part of her screamed, "He had the power to defend you, and he chose not to." Another part whispered, "Maybe he was protecting himself. Maybe he couldn't risk it." She buried her face in her hands. The ache in her chest wasn't just humiliation. It was heartbreak, because somewhere along the way, without meaning to, she had let him matter. And now, she wasn't sure if her pride or her heart hurt more. Later that night, Clara scribbled in her notebook, "You fought to be taken seriously, and when the moment came, he let you fall." She tore out the page, crumpled it, and tossed it into the trash. Then she whispered into the stillness, "No more? Not like this. I won't lose myself just to stand beside him." For the first time since she'd started at Hartman & Co., Clara considered what life would look like without him, and the thought left her hollow. In his penthouse, William sat alone at his desk. The city lights glittered beyond the glass, but he barely saw them. Her empty chair at the boardroom replayed in his mind. Her voice, trembling but strong, the flash of hurt in her eyes when she looked at him. He told himself silence was strategy, that defending her would have only fueled the board's suspicions. But the truth gnawed at him when she needed him most. He hadn't been there, and for a man who prided himself on never failing, it was a failure that cut deeper than any he had ever known. When Clara walked away, William thought he could bury himself in work, the same way he had always done. But the silence she left behind echoed in every corner of his office. Her desk sat empty, her notes perfectly aligned, her handwriting still marking reminders on the calendar. For the first time in years, William missed the sound of another human voice more than he missed a deadline. The board considered the problem resolved. Clients were satisfied with the Sterling campaign. On paper, everything ran smoothly, but in reality, the company felt brittle. Meetings dragged, emails went unanswered, departments stalled without Clara's quick solutions and uncanny ability to connect dots no one else saw. William, who prided himself on precision, began arriving late, missing calls, snapping at employees. His staff whispered, "He's worse than before she came." By the third week, William admitted what he could no longer ignore. Without Clara, the company wasn't the only thing falling apart. He was falling apart. He tried calling her. The line went straight to voicemail. He even sent handwritten notes, something he hadn't done since college. No response. Finally, in desperation, he called David from legal, the one man who had always been quietly sympathetic to Clara. David hesitated, then sighed. "She's out at a horse farm north of the city, volunteering, said she needed something real, something that couldn't be taken away by gossip." A horse farm. William almost laughed. He had never set foot on one in his life, but he wrote down the address. Saturday morning found him driving a rental car far too small for his 6-foot frame, bumping down a dirt road 2 hours outside Chicago. The skyline had long disappeared, replaced by wide fields and crisp autumn air. When he pulled into the gravel lot, the first thing he noticed was the smell, earthy, sharp, alive. Horses grazed in fenced pastures, their coats shining in the sun. He adjusted his tie out of habit, then realized how absurd he looked. Italian leather shoes sinking into mud, a suit far too formal for a farm. And then he saw her. Clara stood by a corral, hair tied back, wearing worn jeans and boots. She was brushing the mane of a chestnut horse, humming softly. For a moment, William couldn't move. She looked peaceful in a way he had never seen in the office. Grounded, whole. Then she spotted him. Her expression froze. The brush stilled in her hand. "What are you doing here?" she called across the corral. I came to find you." His voice cracked, surprising even himself. "Well, congratulations. You found me?" She turned back to the horse. William climbed through the fence, immediately regretting it. His shoe slipped on the wet earth, and he fell squarely into a patch of mud. Clara's lips twitched despite herself. "That's a $500 suit, isn't it? 800, he muttered, trying to stand, mud streaking his sleeve. Before he could regain balance, the horse Clara was brushing nudged him hard in the shoulder. William stumbled backward into the mud again. Clara laughed outright this time, a warm, genuine sound that hit him like sunlight. He doesn't like strangers in his space. William wiped mud from his face with a grimace. Story of my life. For a moment, they stood in silence, the horse flicking its tail lazily between them. Then William drew a deep breath. "Clara, I came here because I owe you more than an apology." She didn't answer, but her eyes softened slightly. "In that boardroom, I thought I was protecting the company, protecting you by not feeding the fire. But the truth is I was protecting myself. I was afraid of what they'd say if I admitted how much you mattered to me." Clara lowered her gaze, brushing the horse's mane again. "I failed you," William continued, his voice breaking, "and I hate myself for it. You deserve my voice, and instead, You got my silence. Clara swallowed hard. She had replayed those moments too many times to count. The sting of betrayal still lingered. Do you know what it felt like, she asked quietly, to stand there, accused, humiliated, and to look at you, hoping you'd see me and find nothing? William stepped closer, mud squelching under his shoes. Yes, because I see it every night when I close my eyes. Her chest tightened. She wanted to stay angry. She wanted to hold on to the wall she had built. But his words, raw and clumsy, chipped at it. Clara, he whispered, I don't care about the company anymore. Not the way I used to. What I care about is you. I miss your chaos, your questions, your way of seeing the world. You turned my fortress into something human, and I can't go back to living without that. Clara's hand trembled on the brush. The horse nickered softly, sensing her unease. You don't get to just say that after everything, she said, her voice trembling. Love, if that's what you're hinting at, doesn't erase betrayal. No, William said quickly. It doesn't. But maybe it can heal it, if you'll let it. Clara closed her eyes. Inside, a storm raged. Her pride screamed, he left you alone. Don't give him another chance. Her heart whispered, he came all this way. He's standing in mud for you. He's trying. When she opened her eyes, William was still there, disheveled, mud-stained, waiting. Not the powerful CEO who terrified executives, but a man stripped bare. William, she said softly, if I let you back in, it can't be halfway. If you ever leave me standing alone again, it'll break me. He stepped forward, voice thick. Then I swear I'll never let you stand alone again. The horse nudged between them, forcing William back a step. Clara laughed through her tears. Even he doesn't believe you yet. William smiled, a real smile, messy and vulnerable. Then I'll earn it, from him, from you, from whoever it takes. Clara shook her head, wiping her cheeks, against her better judgment. Hope flickered. For the first time, she thought maybe, just maybe, this impossible man was worth the risk. When Clara walked back through the glass doors of Hartman & Co., the office buzzed with hushed whispers. People craned their necks as if they'd just seen a ghost. But she wasn't returning as William's assistant. Her nameplate now read, Director of Creative Strategy. The board, pressured by Sterling's praise and William's ultimatum, had no choice but to acknowledge her worth. It wasn't charity, it was survival. Clara took her seat in a new office, sunlight streaming across the polished desk. The space was hers, but the transition wasn't easy. Some colleagues greeted her stiffly, others avoided her altogether, and William tried to keep a professional distance. But their history hummed in every glance. The first test came quickly. A new client wanted a bold campaign. Clara's team drafted concepts brimming with energy, messy dorm rooms, half-eaten pizza, the chaotic reality of young professionals. William scanned the pitch and frowned. It's too informal. Investors expect Polish. Clara met his gaze across the table. Investors aren't the audience. The audience wants real. The room tensed. In the past, Clara might have backed down. But now, with authority of her own, she stood firm. William's jaw tightened, but instead of dismissing her, he leaned back. Convince me. She did step by step, detail by detail, until even he had to admit her logic held. For the first time, their disagreement ended not with frustration, but with grudging respect. Days turned into weeks. They clashed often over color schemes, budgets, presentation styles. William wanted order. Clara thrived in chaos. But gradually, something shifted. He started pausing before dismissing her ideas. She started listening for the reasoning beneath his rigidity. Their arguments became less about winning and more about understanding. The staff noticed. Meetings once tense now sparked with energy. Ideas collided, clashed, and fused into something stronger. Like iron sharpening iron, David from legal whispered once, watching them debate. Late one night, the office was nearly empty. Clara stood in the conference room, papers spread across the table. William walked in carrying 2 coffees. "Don't worry," he said. "Black, no sugar." She smirked, learning from past mistakes, trying to... Yes. They worked side by side, the silence companionable. At one point, Clara leaned over his notes, brushing his hand by accident. Neither pulled away. William looked at her, then really looked. Not as an employee, not as a problem to solve, but as the woman who had turned his carefully constructed world upside down. "Clara," he said softly, "do you ever think about us?" Her heart raced. She set down her pen. "All the time. And I tell myself it's dangerous, because it is," he admitted. "But so is living behind walls, and I've done enough of that for one lifetime." Clara's throat tightened. For weeks, she'd wrestled with whether to trust him again. But here he was, not the untouchable CEO, but a man trying, awkward and raw. She took a slow breath. "If this happens, William, it has to be equal. Not me in your shadow. Not you pulling strings. Partners. Partners," he repeated, "in work. And if you'll let me in everything else." The moment hung between them. Clara could hear the hum of the city outside, the faint buzz of a fluorescent light overhead. Ordinary sounds, yet everything felt extraordinary. She reached for his hand. He took it, holding on like it was the most natural thing in the world. And for the first time, they didn't need more words. Because in that quiet conference room, hand in hand, they both knew the truth. They weren't just rebuilding a company. They were rebuilding each other. A year can change everything. 12 months after Clara Bennett returned to Hartman & Co., the company was unrecognizable. Campaigns no longer felt like glossy brochures. They pulsed with life, humor, and humanity. Clients flocked from across the country, eager to work with the firm that had somehow made corporate strategy feel authentic. Behind every chart of soaring profits, Clara's fingerprints could be found: her messy sketches, her relentless questions, her insistence on speaking to people as they really were, not as polished images. And William Hartman, he was different too. The man once known as Chicago's coldest CEO now paused in the break room to ask about someone's kids. He remembered birthdays. He even brought in donuts on Fridays, though he still refused the powdered ones, insisting they left unacceptable residue. His transformation didn't erase his sharp edges, but it softened them, enough for the people around him to see the man beneath the armor. The culmination of it all came on a crisp November evening at the city's Grand Hotel ballroom. A chandelier glittered overhead as the business elite of Chicago gathered for the annual Leadership and Innovation Awards. When William's name was announced, the applause thundered. He walked to the stage, composed as always. But Clara, watching from the front row, noticed his hand tremble ever so slightly as he adjusted the microphone. "Thank you," he began, his voice steady. "This award is meant to honor leadership. But tonight, I can't pretend this recognition belongs to me alone." The room stilled. William scanned the audience until his eyes found Clara's. 1 year ago, our company stood at a crossroads. Profits were fine, but our soul was missing. And then someone walked into my office late, unprepared, carrying a resume stained with coffee. A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. Clara's cheeks flushed. "That someone," William continued, "was Clara Bennett. She challenged everything I thought I knew about running a business. She pushed against my walls, argued with my rules, and forced me to see that strength isn't rigidity. It's the courage to change." Clara's eyes stung. Around her, people turned to look, some with surprise, others with admiration. "Tonight," William said, his voice softening, "this award doesn't just belong to me. It belongs to Clara, the heart of our company. And the reason I stand here not only as a better leader, but as a better man." The applause was deafening. Clara blinked rapidly, willing herself not to cry. But William wasn't finished. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Gasps rippled through the audience. Clara froze. "Clara Bennett," William said, his voice suddenly raw, vulnerable in a way she'd never heard before. You tore down the fortress I built around my life. You showed me that sincerity, even when messy, is more powerful than perfection. And you taught me that love, real love, isn't weakness. It's the greatest strength a man can have. He dropped to one knee, the polished stage creaking under his weight. Will you marry me for a moment? The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Clara covered her mouth, her heart pounding. 1,000 images flashed through her mind: the first chaotic interview, the late-night arguments, the horse farm where he fell into the mud. Every moment that had chipped away at her defenses until she finally saw the truth. This flawed, stubborn man was hers. She rose from her chair, walked to the stage, and took his hand. Yes, she whispered. Yes, William, 1,000 times, yes. The crowd erupted, applause echoing like thunder. Later that night, as they stood together on the balcony overlooking the city lights, William slipped his arm around her shoulders. You know, Clara said with a smile, you're still terrible at coffee. He chuckled, and you're still late to everything. They laughed, their voices mingling with the hum of Chicago below. And in that moment, Clara realized the truth she wanted the whole world to know. Love had broken through the coldest fortress. Not polished speeches, not perfect strategies, but love, messy, awkward, sincere. Sometimes, the clumsiest honesty is the greatest strength of all. Clara and William's journey reminds us of something timeless. Success means little if it comes at the cost of our humanity. William built walls so high that no one could reach him, believing solitude was strength. But in the end, it was Clara's honesty, sometimes clumsy, sometimes inconvenient, that showed him true strength lies in vulnerability. Many of us, especially as we grow older, carry scars of disappointment and betrayal. It feels safer to hide behind routines, silence, or pride. Yet those walls also keep out the very connections that could bring us joy. Clara's courage to stay authentic, even when mocked or doubted, is a lesson in living with integrity. Her refusal to let gossip define her worth is a reminder that dignity is more valuable than approval. And William's change teaches us that it is never too late to soften, to learn, to love. Perhaps the greatest takeaway is this: real love, whether in family, friendship, or romance, is not about perfection. It's about showing up, even awkwardly, with sincerity. Sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is risk being human. Thank you so much for spending your time with us and joining Clara and William's journey. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like, share it with someone who might need the reminder, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep bringing you more meaningful stories. See you in the next one,